Hi everyone, so welcome to my kitchen. I am back at home quarantining and I just had this idea a while ago and I just finally sat down and decided to do it. But just talking about the costume design in Atonement. Atonement is one of my favorite movies. For those of you who don't know, I've always just really loved this movie for the cinematography, the acting, the music, the storyline. So I'm very comfortable with talking about this film, which is why I wanted to do it. So I want to get something out of the way. Like, there will be mild spoilers. Like, I didn't want to divulge anything too big or too shocking because I do want to encourage as many people to see this as possible if they haven't seen it already. But I will be dissecting certain scenes and talking about how these costumes kind of uphold the themes in the film. So with that being said, let's get to it. So for context, the film was released in 2008, directed by Joe Wright. The costume design is by Jacqueline Duran, and it stars Saoirse Ronan, Keira Knightley, and James McAvoy. It mostly takes place in England, starting with a 1935 summer day, and then continues over the course of World War II. Cecilia and Bryony Tallis are sisters of an upper-class family. They live on a country estate just north of London, and Robbie Turner is their housekeeper's son. It is essentially a love story between Cecilia and Robbie and follows them over a number of years. The film is from Bryony's perspective as a reflection of the things she did in her childhood, specifically on this 1935 day, to cause turmoil between the three characters. So now on to the costume design. When crafting the 1930s costumes, Duran did take some notes from the 1920s. And I believe that was done because this segment of the film, this 1935 day, is told from Bryony's perspective. It is a memory, a distant childhood memory. Blending the elements of the 20s and 30s really emphasizes Bryony's idealized perception and nostalgia for this time, kind of like anchoring this scene as far away from like the World War II present where she's training as a nurse as possible. In some, the first part of the film is supposed to be this nostalgic pre-war fantastical memory, and that's visually expressed through pale colors and light, airy fabrics. The silhouettes are generally accurate to the times, but the overall execution appeals to modern sensibilities to convey glamour and luxury. Because sometimes when looking at older clothes, even though they were considered fashionable at the time, we can see them being drab or dated, which actually takes away from the cinematic magic. The second part of the film is the harsh present reality, expressed through darker, lusterless colors and stiffer fabrics. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about 3 costumes that really stood out to me, and they're incidentally all Cecilia's costumes. Costume 1. Cecilia's first costume is a blouse and skirt combo. The ensemble is in period-accurate colors. Muted colors at this time were very popular, such as brown, gray, blush, dove blue. The cut of the skirt is calf length, the waist is at its correct position after being low for a while in the 20s, and both pieces are patterned. Both floral and geometric prints were in fashion, and there are buttons running down the side of the skirt. However, I would say that the blouse is too low for the 1930s, as most day wear during this time had high necklines, and also the mismatched patterns between the top and the bottom. I haven't seen any old photographs of women doing that. Not saying that they couldn't, because they would have these 2 pieces in their closet, but I just didn't really see that being on trend. But overall, I think Duran did a great job of emulating this airiness, this lightness, fairy-like quality with Cecilia for this outfit. And you can even see that with the fabric choice, which was also, period accurate. Like in the 30s, sheer light fabrics were very popular choices for summer ensembles. So in this case, they kind of go hand in hand with both characterizing Cecilia in Bryony's view, but also just creating the correct atmosphere by kind of pinpointing the trends. Also, a cool thing about this outfit is that we get to see her undergarments underneath it when she goes to dive into the fountain to retrieve a piece of her broken vase. As you can see, she's not wearing much. This was no doubt purposeful to make her seem more naked. since if she was actually wearing all the layers that women of this period often wore, she would probably end up looking frumpier in this scene. It would still be super scandalous during the 30s for her to be stripped down with those layers, but there is no doubt in my mind that the film appealed to modern sensibilities of like the wet and tight, thin clothing to draw a more scandalized reaction from the audience. We are also, again, supposed to be seeing this through a child's perspective, and it could be just that Bronnie imagined Cecilia to be looking more naked than she was because maybe she was more scandalized, and that's just kind of how her mind processed this image. We don't know, but Cecilia is a young woman, and most young women at this time were wearing quite a lot, like bras, girdles, corsets, stockings. So, you know. Second outfit, the green dress. This is for sure one of the most talked about dresses in film costume history. It is beautiful in its own right, but it's also pretty accurate. Body-defining, bias-cut, floor-length dresses with marked waists and low backs in shiny, silky fabrics were all the rage thanks to the Hollywood film industry. The main inaccuracy would be the laser-cut designs on the bodice. Traditionally, in 1930s, evening dresses would have decorative beading, but Duran has noted that the laser cutting was an homage to the idea of taking away rather than adding, because as we know, Cecilia does lose her virginity in this scene. And even though low backs and bare shoulders were on trend, the spaghetti straps add a risque factor that sets this dress apart from traditional 30s evening wear. The undergarment scenario is also interesting here. We see artful glimpses of Cecilia getting dressed. There's one frame where her dress falls to the floor over her bare legs. So once again, no stockings, probably no girdle either. She could be wearing a strapless bustier, which existed at this time to accommodate these kinds of evening dresses. But we can also assume Cecilia wasn't wearing anything at all. And that's honestly fine as well, because women of this time period sometimes didn't wear any underwear underneath their evening dresses. And what I think was probably just a choice out of convenience and practicality purposes, it's whatever. It was also historically accurate. That's great that that aligned perfectly for them. And I say that just because, you know, I understand when directors kind of make these decisions or costume designers make these decisions, because we do want that cinematic quality. We want to, the scene was beautiful, like the fluid motions, and if she had to wriggle out of a girdle, it would have taken away from the moment. But back to the dress elements and what it means for carrying the themes for this film. Emerald green is not only possible, but also in vogue in the 30s because jewel tones were very popular for 30s evening wear. But also in color theory, green symbolizes a number of things, including renewal, abundance, and lack of experience. So these all pertain to Cecilia in this part in the film. She's abundantly rich. She has everything she needs, but she also has Robbie now. And yes, she does lack experience, hence the whole virginity thing, but also her stuttering confession to Robbie. But now, after all that's done, and now that she's consummated her love with Robbie, she has this new opportunity to pursue a more serious relationship with him. And in a way, that is like a renewal. But also, Bryony walks in on them during their sex scene. And in this case, green can also represent envy. It's shown later more explicitly, but you can kind of see at the beginning of the movie that Bryony does have this crush on Robbie. And when she sees Cecilia, we can kind of just guess or postulate that one of the reasons why she becomes so hostile towards Robbie is out of spite that he has chosen her sister over her. Outfit number 3, the nurse uniform. Let's talk about the construction first. So Polish and Czech vintage bed sheets were used for the apron because of their weight and weave. The original World War II uniforms were striped, and Duran said she did look for good striped fabric, but couldn't find any that weren't polyester cotton. So they used linen cotton fabric. Polyester wasn't invented till 1941, for those of you who don't know. And in the scene where she wears the nurse uniform, it's 1940, the year that Robbie enlists. So it would be not only inaccurate, but also impossible for her to be wearing polyester. Duran has said in an interview that the original World War II nurse uniform was lilac and that she changed it to pale blue by Wright's request. I'm going to take an educated guess in that the reasoning for this color change is also relating to color theory. So light blues are associated with serenity in general and calmness, and Cecilia is actually pretty calm in the scene for what you would expect her to be, I guess. Saying goodbye to her boyfriend and, just being a nurse during this tragic time period. But she's very centered in her future with Robbie. She talks about this house by the beach that they're gonna live in together. And, she's just very anchored in how he's gonna come back to her, regardless of, anything else. So that's kind of beautiful, but yeah, it explains why she's dressed in blue. But also not just that, blue represents trust and loyalty. And at this point, she has revealed that she did choose Robbie over her family. They disapproved of him, so she kind of cut them off.
Have you been in touch with your family?
No, I told you I wouldn't.
Blue is also associated with water. Water is thematically tied to Bryony, Cecilia, and Robbie, and we can also see that through the use of blue tones made predominant in the color palette of this film. Water symbolizes rebirth, purification, and atonement. Robbie is somewhat of a Christ figure in this film. He's very empathetic, always has good intentions, and yet still is crucified metaphorically by society. Cecilia is in a way his only devout believer. The fountain scene clarifies to Cecilia and Robbie that they do love each other. Her commitment to him is now solidified through this kind of baptism. We can also say that water itself is purity, and Cecilia and Robbie's immersion into it throughout parts of the film show that their love is pure, despite all the tragedy and destruction that provides obstacles in their paths to each other. Having Cecilia wear blue in the scene, which is ultimately a culmination of the sacrifices she's willing to make for Robbie, gives visual cues to the audience of the large themes in this film. Anyway, so that's the end of this video. I hope you like it. I hope you like the costumes in this movie. I hope you pay attention to the costumes in this movie upon rewatch if you hadn't noticed them before. I really love them. I really love this movie in general. And I guess if you liked this kind of video, I'd be open to doing more of them. Let me know. Thank you for tuning in.